Hello everyone and welcome into the Gibson Show, where today I am joined by not a talented player, but the one and only WhiPPet cast. WhiPPet, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy you didn't include the word talent to describe me, because I have absolutely none of it. But I'm finally on the Gibson Show. I've been begging to be here for a while. For the amount of time we worked together, the fact is you just wouldn't let me on your show. I was actually traumatized by it.
There was a long list, and I had to get everyone else to say no before I got to you. You know, but no, it's about time. But like I said, I've been doing these for a while, and we've always been talking about getting you on because mostly it's been players for the most part that I've had on. But it's good to finally get you on because you've got some interesting takes when it comes to Siege, and I'm looking forward to hearing them today.
Interesting's an interesting way to say it. I think bad is a more accurate one, to be honest. I'm sure players will love my opinions on certain teams. Well, I mean, fire away, Gibby. What do you want to ask?
Because you're definitely not biased. You're not a biased caster at all, but it's fine.
Me?
It's
No.
fine. Coughs and 10-star, but we'll keep on moving. So basically, what we're going to do today is we'll chat a bit about you and how you got to where you are today, and we'll talk a little bit as well about the upcoming CL playoffs and where you kind of think things will lie with that. And then we'll touch on the major and have a little chat about the groups because there's some interesting ones there. So we'll kick off to when everything good in your career started, when I DM'd you on Twitter a year ago. Nah, I'm kidding. Why don't you tell all the viewers how you got into casting?
Well, basically, I had been part of Siege as or at least playing Siege since the first closed betas on console back when I was on Xbox, and I love the game. I think every single person at this stage still hanging around absolutely loves the game. I moved to PC because I just kind of got bored of being on console. Always wanted to, and I thought, maybe I'll chase the comp player dream. I was bad, quite frankly. Then I was like, oh, I still want to be involved in comp. Maybe I'll be a coach or an analyst, and I didn't have the work ethic for it. In the same regard, I wasn't creative enough with strategies or I think analytically minded to sit in spreadsheets and figure out counterbands and stuff. And the team I was with at the time, which was mostly just close friends, said you have charisma, you're energetic, when you're in the team speak after games, you hype us up and everything, try casting. And I had no idea. I'm super introverted, so I was like, I'll not cast. And one day I got a DM on Discord saying they've booked me in for a cast. And so I do it. It's Talent League. It's still going on, but the tier 4 stepping stone for lots of people. And it was possibly the worst experience ever. Production didn't work. The co-caster had no clue about Siege at all, and I was bad. I was that awful. I thank God that VOD doesn't exist anymore because I don't want to ever see it. But I just kept getting booked in. Eventually, Jerry and Absolute AJ reached out, got me into their league at the time, ECS. Met all the people I know today, obviously Brad and Peak will be a guy that a lot of people know from all the work in his production. And eventually, I managed to get lucky enough to get a couple of nice bit of work. Went to Buell, or the Badass University League that he ran from their LAN event. Then kind of eventually you shot me a DM, and from there on, things have kind of went a little bit up.
It's been a pretty crazy year when you think about it, because in the space of a year, you've gone all the way from doing, You Can Rumble, kicked it all off after CL Quals, to work in an S tier event, traveling across the world to work live in a venue. How has that kind of been for you on a personal level? Because I know that as a caster myself, it is tough breaking down those walls and making through the levels. How has it been for you?
I would say that jump from tier 3 stuff to Rayad for Gamers 8 was possibly one of the most jarring transitions ever. You go from sitting right here, doing You Can Rumble, which for people that don't know, when you do You Can 2, right? Well, when it was You Can 2, it's a long day. You come in, I came in from work at 5, I'd sit down, I'd go straight into a cast, I could be there till 1 a.m. And then you go that
cast. That I know the You Can 2 cast you're on about. You and Grace were exhausted at the end of that night.
Yeah, that was. I mean, I obviously 1 a.m. was the worst example we had of it. But there's a point where you do a lot of the work because you love it, and then we got lucky enough, of course, with the opportunity to go out to Rayad, and it was that moment where you go from fan to peer of these people was really weird. I think you've kind of probably mentioned or talked to people. We went to the hotel. and you're sitting there and there's people like Pojaman, Bolo, Shaiko, all getting food sitting around you. It's like all of a sudden you're like, feels a little bit more real. There's a bit more gravitas behind it. And of course, we're halfway around the world in a country I never thought I'd ever be in to cast Siege. Was a very surreal moment. And it took a couple of the days, it's probably like until we'd done the first cast, it still didn't feel real. And then it started to get into a workflow a little bit normal. So it was very surreal, almost alien to have that step up and such a kind of stark contrast from working in my little tiny room in rural Ireland to Rayad.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we spoke about was, you know, that little stage on Twitter where everyone was like, nobody here knows I'm a caster. We were in a hotel full of professional players, and that applied to us. apart from Wild, not a single player knew who we are we're going into that.
I had that moment, you know the story, but the pool floor, the restaurant and the pool was all on the second floor or something, and so all of the accommodation, all of the player rooms, practice rooms were above that, so they're like 3, 4, and 5. So I'm heading up, and Dexter, the guy he was subbing in for SSG at the time before he went to Mirage, he goes in, holds the lift, goes, "Can I hold this lift?" I go, yeah, no worries. And all of SSG pilot, every single one of them. And it's like, oh, that's all well and good. And it's like Lycan walks in, Rampy walks in, Bosco walks in. And I was like, that was like one of those like, oh shit, like what is this moment? Like, I think that's going to be so burned into my memory. At least just this random lift. No one had an absolute clue who I was. No one cared. It was like, I'm in a lift with SSG, and no one knows. Actual world champions in this lift, and they have no idea who I was. It was
still don't.
Very interesting.
They still don't. They're like,
no, that's true.
Who was that fellow?
Why was there? Might remember.
He might. Well, we did sit beside them in the airport as well, so there is that. But anyways, we'll move on. We'll not talk about that anymore. We're going to talk a little bit about Challenger League, WhiPPet. So we were lucky enough that we got to cast groups as part of probably the biggest production crew ever put together. I think there was about 785 casters and analysts that we had.
That's a low ball number as well. Like
that's us going low, but we're down to our top 8 teams. And we're looking forward to seeing what they're going to do over the next few weeks. But as I bring them up on screen, and we're going to bring up the bracket.
I didn't realize we had graphics, Gibby.
Look, it's not quite, the level of having a production team, but having a stream deck does help. So
I wasn't expecting that, mate.
We're going to talk through each of the matchups in the upper bracket. We're not really going to talk too much about the lower bracket because we don't know what's going to happen there and what the fixtures are going to be. But we'll kick it off with Death Row and Ascent. And that's a battle of 2 French teams, and with the Challenge League always being broadcast from the studio in Paris, I'm sure a lot of people would love to see a French team go all the way. But these are 2 very different stylistic teams. What do you think about that matchup going into it?
So when I look at this entire upper bracket, this was the one that picks my brain the most, because Ascent and Death Row are both. Obviously, it's fantastic that like the 2 only like national system to get 2 teams in was France this year, and they're, as you said, so stylistically different. If Death Row have another like run where Swaz pops up and absolutely becomes an absolute demon in the server, they have a very good chance. But I feel Ascend might have a little bit more legs in a best of 3 format. I feel like they're a very, very good side, and I think they lost Lake Effect. If I'm correct, I'm only realistically awake. Do apologize for that one. But when they lost him, that's a pretty big blow. You'd imagine in firepower. But they've restructured the team in such a way that they work with what they've got, and they're a very, very dangerous side. When we move to best of 3s, I think Ascend might have a little bit more of that long-term advantage. But Death Row aren't going to make it easy, and that's the big toss-up to me initially when I look at this matchup, at least in the upper bracket or the starting games. Very interested to see how that one goes, especially the best of 3 format.
Well, I think what we saw from Death Row whenever we watched them play is Swaz and Shukri are kind of that 1-2 punch they have, but they're not necessarily your old-fashioned entry duo that are getting picks early in the round. But when you watch them play, those 2 players become more dangerous as the round comes on. They're kind of lurkers. They give you that kind of aces feel where in the last minute and a half of the round, that's where they tend to come to life. Do you think that shutting them down in the late rounds is the key to winning this one for Ascend?
Well, when you have that style of play, it's very difficult to go into it and deal with it. So, I mean, look how during the Berlin Major, right, how successful Rogue were with Pride on that lurking role. Because you can't really commit your structure to dealing with it, because they're going to reposition, they're going to wait, they're going to play super passive. Their job's to waste time if you get hunted. And that's where they have, of course, that big advantage. And Shukri and Swaz, the fact is their game sense is absolutely brilliant. The fact that they have the confidence to wait a little bit longer to make an impact, trust the rest of the team, the other 3 members on site, for say, and they can pop up and have that. For Ascend, the key will be either shutting it down early or being very clued in via prep and VODs of when and where Death Row are going to push from. And, of course, the maps as well. If you can bring Death Row to a little bit more linear map, I think that's where you're going to see Ascend have the benefit. And, I mean, out of all of these, this will be a close 2-1 series. That's really where I'm seeing this one getting locked in.
And this is where I put you on the... Because we're going to go the whole way to the final here for Challenge. This is where I put you... put the sword to you. Who wins, Death Row or Ascend?
That's a difficult one, but I won't do a demo and not actually make a prediction. I'll lock it in, and I think Ascend in the best of 3 will get the victory in this one.
Okay, so we got Ascend winning the first matchup. Second matchup is probably another one of those big stylistic clashes with, but you've got Unlimited, who look to rush into 3, 4, 5-0 leads in games. It's how they get a lot of their success, by blitzing teams in the early stages, against 10 Star, who you probably say are one of the best coached teams in all of Siege. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
I mean, Unlimited, from what we saw, obviously they were like the biggest wild card coming into this. It's because we don't have Russian Major League, we don't see a lot of these Russian sides play. But they are very known players. If you're in the trenches, you see them all the time. They run ranked. They're very good at getting that early lead. It's when you have to manage the game, or that style gets figured out, or they begin to get mid-map countered, is where they struggle. And 10 Star is a very good team at doing that. Stylistically, this is the worst dance partner for Unlimited. It's going to be 10 Star, as Unlimited seem to be a side that really like the kind of idea of blowing someone out in the best of 1, being really aggressive, getting that early advantage, and trying to ride onto that one. For 10 Star, they're mental warriors. You can push 10 Star to a point where they could be a map down and a 6-0, and they might still have a fighting chance of clawing that one back. They are such a resilient side. You said they're super well coached. They got a super good structure behind them, and the prep work that they do is insane. And of course, they're all very talented roster. While I loved Unlimited, and I really like the guys on this side, and I love the way they play, this might be the easiest pick because of a best of 3, and I'd say it won't be a blowout, but 10 Star will get the victory, and I think it'll be a 2-0.
Yep, so we got 10 Star against Ascend in the first quarter final then, based on that. And look, we've already spoke a lot about them stylistically, so just give us your shout. Who wins 10 Star Ascend?
This is brain or heart in this one. Right, so I mean, 10 Star haven't had the best run of form recently. They've been a little bit more peak and valley compared to what we saw during their run to Nationals, where they were essentially bought from Split 2 of MPL, the best side, bar Heroic. I'd say it'll be a close one. I think Ascend will get the victory in that.
Perfect. So let's jump to the bottom half of the upper bracket then. Game number 3, Wild against Lamb Party Hotel, which is, of course, next Thursday. This is another team that I think both of us have a little bit of bias for. It's an Irish org. We see their billboards all over the country, so don't be surprised if you hear us talking a little bit about them. But you've got the champions of Germany taking on the champions of V4. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
I'll talk first about V4, because I could literally speak about Wild for hours on end. I think we both could, actually,
I know.
at this point. V4 is a region I think a lot of people overlooked. Again, it's a new merger region from a couple of national, like the Polish Nats one in there. Again, it's not a region I followed too closely during the national season. But the way they've played is so good. And the fact is that a lot of people have slept on this team, I think, is going to ignite the hype about them going into this one. If they get over Wild, that will be huge, and I think they have a potential for a deep run. But can you get over Wild if they're firing on all cylinders? And will Wild show up firing on all cylinders? If Aces decides to play the game, GG. He is one of the best players in this entire set of players inside of CL this season. But will he show up? Will he make an impact? And if Wild have Aces firing on all cylinders, can they support him? And that might sound like I'm kind of building Wild up to be a bit of a one-horse trick here. They've also got Corey, Kaneo. Like, they have a very solid roster around him. But they have that one asterisk, and it's if Aces goes big, they can get rounds off his shoulders alone, and that could be a problem for LAN Party Hotel. But this will be almost as tight as Death Row Ascend. I think this is going to be a 2-1 Wild, would be what I would say for this one.
Okay, we got Wild going on, and then up next we have the team that, that at the start of CL, I was like, Makers are either going to be the best team in CL, or they're not going to be great at all. It all depends how they kind of merge as a 5, because nobody doubts how good the 3 existing members of Makers were. So my opinion, Makers, as of right now, they're the best team in CL, based on what we've seen from the groups, taking on J-Lings. And J-Lings, I think, are another one of those sides where they can adapt their gameplay to play against whoever they're whoever they're up against, because they don't necessarily have a default style. So what are your thoughts on that one? Because I think that's a game that could be a pretty good one.
This will be either a to-the-wire 3-map barn burner, or it's Makers running over J-Lings. That's how this is going to go. So J-Lings, you said, don't have, I think, a very definable core style. They're a super adaptable roster, they're super experienced, and they're always able to find wins. You can put them in really bad situations, round in and round out, and someone's able to make an impact. Whether it's Sam, whether it's Leonsky, they're always there. They're always able to have a positive twist in around. It's if they can do a good job of minimizing mistakes. Because a lot of the time when we see during group stages, even open qualifiers, they made a lot of mistakes and they were often punished by it. And when you look at the other side of this matchup, you've got Makers who just take the game against M&M Academy. How flawless they played that. They were thrown some curveball strategies, and the way they executed upon it was absolutely sublime. Makers are the best team in CL based off the group stages. They are the most well-oiled machine, and J-Lings don't do a good job of mitigating small mistakes. And every team makes small mistakes, but you need to mitigate them, especially against Makers, and you need to be on your ball, and you need to come in with a very solid counter shot around them, especially with how J-Lings plays, in my opinion. But I think I'm going to take Makers to get this, but I will say I can see J-Lings getting a map. I can see them grabbing like an Oregon or a club early, maybe get the opening map of the series, depending on how bans go. So I think I'll go for a 2-1 Makers victory in that.
See, what I want from that fixture, and I know a lot of the viewers do, is Lolo and Draw going at the best of their ability.
That is, that is the most interesting player versus player stat line we're going to watch out of this one. Draw on his day, oh my, and Lolo as well is so. This is the brilliant thing about this CL. Like, there are so many talented individuals, and those individuals are in super talented teams that if they're enabled correctly, they are absolute world beaters. I mean, look at Swaz's performance with Death Row, how good he was in that Oregon game where it was a, 20-2 or something was the KD?
Something crazy. I think it was a 10 KD he ended up with. I think it was a 20-2.
You look at, you've got players like Jegs on 10-star, again, who's in a system that's very much designed to enable him. You've got, of course, Kaneo Aces on Wild, which the team is built around being able to enable their aggressive style of play. If Lalo and Draw get going and they can really start having an impact, and it comes down to each other to shut the other one down, we might have an instant classic of CL. And that's still the opening stage of the bracket. Those teams are going head to head.
Yeah, because there's a lower bracket. You lose and you're not out, which I think is the one thing going into every team's back pocket. And this is the fact that it's not woe is me if you lose the first game. But that moves us into the second quarterfinal, which, going by your picks, is Wild against Makers. And that's that's a heavyweight battle in itself.
There are matchups made in heaven. So the matchmaking gods of Siege have lined this bracket up to give us this game. Right? The Wild versus Makers could be one of the most crazy matches in Challenger League history, because the way Wild plays this game is let's just kind of, be as crazy, as aggressive, in your face as possible. Makers, like, they kind of like that. I can imagine they will revel in that pressure, taking fights, being able to get aggressive. It might not be a strategic masterclass, I would say, but you'll see high level coordination, you'll see high level team play, and it's a very difficult one to call. But I would have to say, with the run of form from groups, Makers would be my pick there.
See, that's that shout. See, what I like about this matchup, and I think it's kind of true with the style of both these sides, there's no fear to lose a map or lose a round. You know, when you look at Makers and Wild, they'll rush. You know, it could be the first round, it could be full overtime match point, and one of these sides will pop out a rush, and it is solely because of the fact that they are not afraid of taking a risk to win a round, whereas other teams, you know, you get the feeling that they play a more regimented, structured style because they don't want to make a mistake that could cost a game. Those two sides, they back themselves to make plays.
It leads to some of the most exciting games that you can watch. I mean, what was it during qualifier 1? We had Wild versus J-Lings on Cafe, which was a 7-5.
It was over in 10 minutes.
It was the quickest 7-5 I've ever witnessed. And I mean, that was almost a perfect dance partner matchup as well. Both teams were not scared to back themselves, take calculated gambles, like those strategic risks, and they were really good at doing it, both sides. But when you do look at that matchup, Wild and Makers, I think Makers are more consistently on the ball than Wild. But Wild, again, if they go into that game on, you know, them versus Liquid at G8 vibes, you know, you could be seeing a very, very scary matchup. And realistically, both these sides, you wouldn't be surprised, no matter how that match went, if you saw them on the final day in the grand final against each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm really, really excited for that. So that would take us to what would be the upper bracket final, or, you know, semi-final, if you want to put it that way, overall, which you've down as Ascend against Makers. We've already built up these two teams. Just give me a shout. Ascend or Makers making the final?
Makers.
Okay, and then everybody else jumps into that lower bracket gauntlet. Which team do you think has the depth that it needs to make their way through to play against Makers in the final?
The big thing about the lower bracket is this is when pressure is really on team shoulders. You've lost your life, so now it's you lose, you're going home, and that's your CL run already over. And again, it's been a year. Like, teams have grinded to get to this point for 12 months. If you're looking at just a team that has the depth, and I think our mental strength is there to get themselves through it, TenStar are the first one that jumps out to me. They have been a team that's been picked apart, ravaged by transfers up the inside of EUL for so long now, and they've always come back, and they seemingly come back stronger and stronger every time. So at least on that stat line, depending on how they play, could be different. But if you want someone that can have the mental resolve to make it deeper in the lower bracket, it would be them. I'd then say Wild, just on performance, would be the ones I would say that would make it into the lower bracket final with TenStar. Then that call is a difficult one to make, who would join Makers in the final.
Need you call the WhiPPet? Are you going with TenStar or are you going with Wild?
See, this is the painful thing, Gibby. I absolutely love both these sides.
Really? Never would have guessed.
I do. I've got. This is the thing. Sometimes I bet with my heart a little bit too much, but I think Wild will be able to get it done in what could be another spectacle matchup. It's going to be a very tight one to tell, but Wild on their day, Wild, if all 5 players have shown up and they're really, really ready to go, will beat TenStar. TenStar will have to fight really hard here, I think, to get it done. But again, it's almost a coin toss, but I'll pick Wild, and I'll say it'll be a close 2-1 as well.
There you go. Well, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to make you guess the final, because it's the final. We're not going to be that cruel to you. But for Makers, Wild, and TenStar, I'm really sorry that WhiPPet has cast or cursed all of you. So if you do not make it to the final, you can send WhiPPet a message. He'll be delighted to answer in kind. So one last thing we want to touch on then, WhiPPet. That's the upcoming major. And I know that this is something you're really excited about. You know, this will be not only for you, your 3rd major of the year that you've managed to make your way to, but It's also a major off the back of an EU win in Berlin. So before we even talk about the groups, do you think we'll have back-to-back EU winners, or do you think that this could be a bit of an exercise of futility for the European teams looking at the other teams that have qualified?
I'm looking at two teams, and none of them are European to be my favorites to make it out here and to win the whole thing. I think without Rogue here, I think Rogue are a big game club. I think the way to put it. If Rogue were here, I would say you got them into the semi-final guaranteed. They didn't make it yesterday, and now the shoulders of Europe rest on M&M, BDS, Wolves, and Heroic. I'm not gonna lie. It doesn't fill me with the biggest confidence in the region international play. BDS would be my European favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Then followed by Wolves, Heroic, and then M&M if I were to rank the European sides. I love M&M, but while it was close in Berlin, I think while they made a step up since Berlin, they still need to iron out some of the kind of the kinks. And once they get that done, they could be a world beater side. Now they could absolutely come out of the gate swinging, and their group looks pretty open to it as well. Like, I see M&M getting second place in this group. It just won't be easy. Heroic, don't know if they make it out of their group here. TSM and Liquid look a little bit scary, even though Liquid's run of form hasn't been as consistent as we'd like to see. And Group C fills me with a lot of anticipation.
Right, so let's actually go through the groups then quickly. We're kind of running out of time here. So Group A, Cyclops, Sonics, M&M, and Black Dragons. Who's your top two coming out of that one?
I'm going to say Black Dragons will top the group, and I'll lean into my European bias. I'll say M&M gets second place.
Okay, so funny enough, that is Black Dragons, the team that Kaneo said were going to come last in Group A. So I like the fact that you have gone for polar opposites. Group B, and this is a head or heart one for you again. Two teams that you got to see in the flesh very recently, and I know that anybody who knows WhiPPet knows that Nesk is one of his favorite players of all time. He could talk about Nesk all day. Joined by Sandbox and Heroic. Heroic, let's be real, that was a hell of a performance against Rogue to get them to this major, and they are going to be really buoyed by that. Like, I think mentally they're going to feel phenomenal going into this. Who's your top two in Group B?
I think TSM's run of form has been really good inside of NAL, but it's NAL. So, like, how much is that them being good and how much that other team's falling off? So, I'm going to be risky, and I'll say TSM will top the group. And I'm going to back you again and say Heroic post-Rogue victory buff, basically. They beat their rivals. They beat that kind of back and forth thing. So I think they'll be really motivated to do well here. And I like Heroic as a side. I like the players. So I think TSM Heroic will be my two out of here. And it pains me to say Liquid won't make it, but I've not been convinced fully by them recently.
So let's move on to Group C. And this to me comes across as the group of gunners. You know, the individual players in this group. You can mention BDS of two of them. You know, let's be real. Shaiko and EFAC are both incredible on their day. SSG have so much talent from top to bottom. Fury have that APAC wildcard buff about them where you don't know what's going on. And then W7M, a side that I think has only really gotten better as the year has gone on. Who's your two?
So this is what I would say pretty close to the group of death in this major. W7M looked like world beaters on their day. BDS, we know how good they are. SSG, a big push from them again. And Fury, a little bit of an unknown side, I think, for some people coming from that APAC region. But again, they're here on merit, so you'd imagine they'd be able to put up a fight. But I'm not going to pick 1 and 2 here. I'll just pick the top two. I think I'm going to make it through. In no particular order, W7M and BDS would be my picks from that group.
I think a lot of people might agree with you on that one. So then it brings us to Group D, the group of dogs. Wolves, Snoop Dogg's team, and Owls. You know, Mirage. What are your thoughts on this one? Because, and as I said to Kaneo earlier, you actually have to distinguish between Wolves and Dire Wolves when you're making your call. But what are your thoughts on this group and who do you have coming through?
The first thing I would say is you'd want to imagine FaZe will have another good run. With the fact is, finalists in Berlin, they pushed Rogue to the absolute limit in that final, and they've looked consistently dangerous within their own region and all throughout the recent international performances. I'll say FaZe to top the group. And while I want to back Europe. I really want to back Europe here. There's something scary. I don't feel completely confident in Wolves, even though back-to-back stage winners inside of EUL, internationally, they've been a little bit slow off the chops, and that does scare me. But I will lock them in, and I'll say Mirage will be a dark horse in this group. They didn't expect to make it here. Not a lot of people did. And if there's ever a Cinderella story, it will come from Mirage.
So based on what you've said, Whippet, as we go back to back to the two of our ugly mugs on screen, is you're backing half of the teams to qualify out of groups to be EU?
I'm a little bit biased, not gonna lie. I want to see Europe. Listen, another European major, another European team victory. We need it right now. We need it. LATAM's won enough. Dark Zero won in Charlotte, right? So we can get 2 home turf victories. I'll take it. And also, Heroic, for example, they're a majority Nordic team at this stage. They're basically playing realistically on their backyard. So I'd say there's a good chance, a nice little home buff for some players like Uno.
Yeah, well, we will soon find out because it is just a month away. CL is a week away, Whippet. Before we wrap up, anything you want to say to everybody ahead of this, maybe about yourself or anyone you want to call out, because I know that you like calling people out.
I'll save the calling out until I'm doing a segment about teams like at some stage of everything. That's when it might be more of a thing. But of course, thanks for having me on, Gibby. I've been begging, let me on for ages. And you finally sent me a random DM and I've crawled out of bed. You jump on and talk absolute nonsense about the major and CL. So it's a pleasure, Gibby. Thank you.
You've worn me down. You wore me down enough that I had to finally agree. But look, guys, make sure to tune in to CL on the official Rainbow Six channel. Whippet and I will be watching just like everybody else. We cannot wait to get stuck into the action. But yeah, Whippet, we'll talk to you again soon and take care, everyone.